Next.
Sorry, did you just say that Ezekiel is called Mighty God? Could you please show us that? I've never heard before that Ezekiel is called Mighty God. Please show us the verse. Go ahead.
Listen closely. Hiskiyahu, not Ezekiel. Ezekiel in English. I don't know how to say it in English. Okay. Anyways, first of all, there is past tense in the Hebrew. I don't know why the Christians keep saying there's no past tense. Okay, you can say it, but there is past tense in Hebrew. Okay, you can say all you want. You can post all your website, all your lies in the world. That doesn't make it true. Okay. If you go look, it's there's a lot of things that are past tense. I am the Lord that took you out of Egypt. That is past tense. Yes, I post the evidence that it's perfect and imperfect. Post your evidence. Okay, God, you don't have to bring any evidence. Okay.
Well, I'll just go to the Ancient Hebrew Research Center. And here. And it says here, each Hebrew verb also identifies the tense of the verb. In English, a verb can have three tenses: present, past, present, or future. Examples of these would be, you cut a tree, past, you are cutting a tree, present, and you will cut a tree, future. Biblical Hebrew only has two tenses, perfect and imperfect. While the three verb tenses in English are related to time, biblical Hebrew verb tenses are related to action. The perfect tense is a completed action, while the imperfect tense is an incomplete action. You're mine.
Okay, I'm not interested what this ancient Hebrew guy has to say. We go by the truth. Truth, the whole truth for nothing but the truth. And I'm going to bring you evidence now, if you'll hold on a minute, and we'll bring.
I think he's lost his connection or something. Are you there, Pete? Are you there? Let me give you another. Let me give you another link. Maybe you'll find this one more reasonable. Hang on. I'll go and get the thing. By the way, Nightmares, since I already gave your website a link, perhaps you could post a link to the room of a Jewish website that you trust in, which says that there is more than two tenses in the Hebrew language. Maybe you could post that to the room. Since you say you are only about the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, let's see what truth you've got. Go ahead.
Okay. Just like I don't believe your books, but you believe them. So how about we post it from your book? Okay. Here's the first verse in Leviticus. And what does it say? The Lord called to Moses. You don't say, you see, it says called, past tense. And that same word called is used in Ezekiel 9. The Hebrew, not the English. Yeah, the Hebrew. Vayikra means called, and he called. all over, you'll see it's interpreted called, even in your own book. So you have me next.
Yeah, so just to clarify on the tenses in Hebrew, this also exists in Arabic as well. It's it's common in Semitic languages actually. You have a an imperfect tense, which is similar to our future or present tense. It's used for for things that haven't taken place yet, and then you have the perfect tense, which is similar to our past tense, which is speaking about things that already have been completed, and so there's actually no debate about that, Pete. But I think that what you're trying to say is that the prophets don't use the perfect tense in their prophetic literature to refer to the future. So in other words, God can speak about something that's already been. So it sounds like it's already been done in the past, but it's actually referring to a future event. There are actually a lot of examples for that, and just for a quick reference, you can look up the prophetic past tense link here. And but anyway, I don't want to distract from your guys' conversation, so I'll let you guys continue on. I just wanted to clarify on that point.
I finished that, but you haven't answered me. Where in the true Bible is a servant called God? Is a servant referred to the true God? That you haven't answered me yet. Megan, don't run away.
Nightmares. Did you understand the response that Jay and I gave you? So although there are two tenses in the Hebrew, but they can reflect things that take place in the future, things that take place in the past, etc., etc. So do you understand that now? Do you accept that? Or do you have something to the contrary? I already linked you to a site which explained the biblical Hebrew, the grammar of it. Do you have something? And there, Jay has provided yet another link. So I'm going to ask you again, do you have a link which explains the grammatical structure of the Hebrew? I'm not asking how it's rendered in the translation. Again, the imperfect and perfect tense can reflect thoughts of actions from the past, present, or future. But the underlying tenses of the verbs themselves are either imperfect or perfect. Do you understand that now? Mic is free.
Okay, he just gave me the link. I have to go study it and see if it's true or not. Okay, we don't accept, just like some other people, just because someone said it, it's true. I'm discussing it. But now could we go on to my question? When is a servant in the true Bible refers to as the true God? Okay. If you claim El Gibar is talking about the true God, because that's the true God is referred to that, and you brought evidence. So where is the evidence that a servant is God?
Yeah, I really like to establish that point. I want us to come to an agreement on Isaiah 9, where it speaks about the child being called El Gibor, and that referring to the true God, the God, not an idol, but the God of Israel, the true God. So if we can establish that, because interestingly, the verse that you posted for us, the language used in that verse, there's language used in that verse, very similar terms that actually are used only of God. For example, it says he's highly exalted and lifted up. That's very similar to when Isaiah had his vision in the temple. he spoke of God highly lifted up, the same exact language. So that's not used of creation. That's used of God. But I wanna before we move on to that though, I want to talk about Isaiah 9:6, which is Isaiah 9:5 in Hebrew, and I want to establish that point first. If we can agree that this is talking about the true God. Otherwise, if we just keep moving on from point to point, I feel like we're not going to get anywhere. So I want to at least come to an agreement on this. And I just want to provide just further just one more reference here. I'll post it in the room. So in Isaiah chapter 10, verse 21, the very next chapter, it says, a remnant will return, a remnant of Jacob will return to the mighty God. Same word is used here, El Gibor, and this is the very, very next chapter. So it's referring to El Gibor, the same El Gibor. So just to show you what instance where this is used to speak of God. Your mic.
So again, even in this verse, it says, a remnant will return, a remnant of Jacob will return to the mighty God. Okay? So we see over here, mighty God is not a name. It's a title. Okay? And in Isaiah 9, it says his name will be called. No, and also it can't be referring to a God, a man God, because God already tells us that he's not a man. So we have to look for other avenues to see the explanation of this verse. God has already told us in many places that he's not a man. We're demon worshipping Jews, and we agree with you 100%. Cool. How you like that? Next.
Okay, so I want to just get clarity on this point, because a lot of there are interpretations of this where it speaks about interpretations that speak about this being messianic, from the Targum to some stuff that Maimonides even wrote about. He applied this to be a messianic prophecy. So I agree that it's important to look at other passages in the Bible where it speaks about God and his nature and whether or not he can become a man. But for right now, let's focus on this. And do you agree with the interpretation that the possible interpretation that this is actually speaking about a son that's given to us who actually is the mighty God? Do you accept that as a possible reading? I'm not saying it's the only reading, but I'm just curious if you accept that as a possible reading. Your mic.
Okay, I actually read the Targum that you mentioned. I didn't. I read Maimonides, and I wouldn't like to say here what he says about your God. Maybe you know already. So, and it doesn't say that it's the Messiah. Okay, it says Mashiach l'Shlama could mean anointed one. It doesn't mean Messiah. Every time the word Mashiach is mentioned, doesn't mean that that's the Messiah. It could mean anointed one. Okay, and all kings were anointed. So it could have been talking about King Hezekiah. Oh, that's in English. Okay, and he was anointed. Okay, so the Targum doesn't, not necessarily saying that it's the Rambam. You didn't tell me where it is. You tell me in the thing, but in the letter, but I couldn't read the whole thing where it is. You have to tell me page 3, page 5, and this and that. Okay. Now it also could be read differently. It could have been read that the mighty God called him Prince of Peace. So we're not exactly sure what the term is. So it's better not to worship false gods on a term that's questionable. See, if you have something that's questionable, then it's better to go to the previous times, what the previous people worship, and keep to them. And no one worshipped the man God in Moses' time, King Ezekiel's time, and all the time until came up this the Christian claim that you should worship a man God. No Jews have worshipped the man God.
Okay, so I just wanted to comment on why I brought up Maimonides. It's not because I agree with everything that he says, but it's just to point out that this is also a Jewish interpretation of the verse. It doesn't. Okay, one second. I just have to get rid of this guy. Okay, yeah. So it's not that I accept everything Maimonides said, but says or said. But it's to point out that this isn't just some Christian innovation. This is actually something that has precedence in Jewish tradition. So yeah, the part I'll give you the link now where this is and I'll give you the section here. It's under this section. It's the last paragraph. I'll post you the whole thing. He goes on to say, this is for a child is born unto us, and a son is given, and the government is on his shoulder. He is called Pelioetz, El Gibor, Aviad, Sar Shalom. And this is another verse alluding to the Messiah. That's what he says. So we have Maimonides agreeing with the Christian interpretation of this verse. And then in the Targum, the word used there is Mashiach Dishlama, which is Aramaic, and it means the Messiah of peace. So I don't think it's referring to just any anointed person. I think that it has because it has the definite article in it. I'm pretty sure, like when you say Mashiach in Aramaic, that means the Messiah. You don't have to put like that's the definite article, that last letter, the A at the end. So it's talking about the Messiah of peace. Okay, now most importantly, I agree with you. Let's stick with what the text says. And you said that while it could be questionable, it's a questionable verse, questionable interpretation. So let's interpret it in light of the clearer verses. Well, I want to first establish if you agree that this is actually a possible reading of the verse. I understand what you said. You said one reading could be that the mighty God called him such and such. But I'm curious if you accept the interpretation that I'm presenting. Do you think that it's at least possible? And then we can get into other topics like, did God appear to people in Genesis, for example? Did God appear in a form? Things like that. We can get into that. Your mic.
Yes, it can be talking about the Messiah. So there's no problem with that. Okay? Because the Messiah is supposed to bring peace for the world. Isaiah says it. So he'd be called the Prince of Peace. So there is a possibility that it could be called the Messiah. That he'd be called Mighty God. That's Messiah might be Mighty God. No, it says, again, read the verse. It says called, not that he'll be. Okay? If he had said he will be, then they have a claim, but it says he will be called. Okay. What is Hezekiah's name in English? Okay, next. And mighty God, why not?
Yeah, that's the question. I mean, do you think that it's appropriate to call someone not like, I understand what you're saying, Hezekiah, meaning like strong, God Yahweh is strong, or my God is strong, or my God is mighty, but this actually doesn't have to refer to his actual proper name, but these are things that he's called, for example. So he's called the Prince of Peace. I mean, do you think that his name, like, do you think that's his whole name? Uh, that this whole thing is his actual entire name? For example, uh, I'm not sure what you mean when you say that, because are you saying that this whole thing is his actual name, or what are you saying exactly? It says, so do you think that the Messiah's actual name would be Pelioet El Gibor Aviad Sar Shalom? One long giant name like that, like a sentence? Your mic.
Right, and no one was called that name, and it says his name will be called. So we're not sure exactly what it is. So you can claim, nobody can claim definitely that this is this and this is that. Like the Rambam says that it's you claim that it's the Messiah, but there are other rabbis that claim differently. So the word Messiah existed before them worshiping Jews. Show me where it existed before. Messiah will be mighty God. You have to show me where it is. It says his name will be called. Okay. Moses' name was called God. And El Gibar doesn't have to be God. It could El means something and Gibar means something. Don't necessarily have to be God. So, like I said, there's different interpretations. So we don't know the exact interpretation. So it's best not to go worshiping idols on the interpretation that you pick. Okay. So first, be 100% sure what you're doing before you start worshiping idols. Okay, I've heard many Christians claim that if you worship a man and he's not a god, that's idol worship. Can you bounce this flying guy, please? He's going against to us. Next.
Okay, Nightmares, let me just make sure I heard you correctly. So you're telling me that you don't actually know who is being spoken of in Isaiah chapter 9, verse 6. Is that correct? Okay. So would it be fair to say that you recognize that there are rabbis that interpreted it to be speaking of the Messiah, correct? Okay. And would you say that you don't have a positive case against Isaiah chapter 9, verse 6 being the Messiah? Would you agree with that? Okay, thank you. All right, good. So we've established that Isaiah chapter 9, verse 6 could possibly be referring to the Messiah. Okay, Jay, you there, brother? Okay, brother, I'll let you continue. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks, Royalson, and thanks, Nightmare. So let's continue on. You asked another question, and I want to address that question, and then I want to bring up other topics, like, for example, God appearing to Moses, for example, in a form or something like that. Okay. So yeah, your question was regarding Isaiah 52, verse 13. It says, "Behold, my servant shall prosper; he shall be exalted and lifted up, and shall be very high, very high, highly exalted." So you asked the question: does my servant, the servant, ever refer to God, the Creator? If it does, I think that this would be an exception because, but like I said, the language that's used here, since I believe that I'm interpreting this as a messianic prophecy, as you know, and the way that I see it is that based on the other interpretations that we provided, for example, Isaiah 9:6 or Psalm 45 or other verses that were God being able to do these things, like God being able to come in the form of a man or in the form of a servant. We can see here that that the language used here, for example, he shall be exalted and highly lifted up. For example, if you go to Isaiah chapter 6, you'll see that when Isaiah has his vision in the temple, he says, for example, oh, okay. It says that he saw the Lord sitting on the high and lifted up. The very same language used here, speaking of the servant. So that language, I think, I'm trying to remember the commentaries that use. It's very like it's saying that, I think it's a midrash or something. It says that the Messiah here, he's lifted high up, high above the angels, high above Abraham, etc. So yes, while it calls him a servant, I agree that it calls him a servant, and I wouldn't be able to give you a reference for another place where he's called where God would be called a servant. But I believe this is a messianic prophecy what God is. God is going to come in the form of a servant. I just want to share this with you to let you in on why I interpret it like this. So this is in the New Testament. Like I said, I know you don't accept it, but it's in Philippians chapter 2. So it goes, let this mind be in you, which is also in Christ Jesus, who being in the form of God, did not consider it robbery to be equal with God, but made himself of no reputation, taking on the form of a bondservant. So remember, the word we're discussing here is the word servant. So this verse actually, in the form of he took on the nature of a human, and he became a servant. So I know you don't accept that. I said that probably 3 times already. Hope I'm not annoying you, but that's why I interpret it like this, because I interpret it in light of passages like that. But then the other language used here, besides my servant, you have other language used here like he's high and lifted up, and I think that language is only applied to God. Your mic.
Okay. So you can't find any place where it says a servant is God in the Hebrew Bible. You had to go to yours, and that I appreciate. You can follow anything you want as long as you're God. As far as highly lifted up, okay, this verse in Isaiah, it says, I saw him high and exalted, okay? He didn't have to become highly exalted. He was already highly exalted, okay? He was from the beginning. Here it says, in Isaiah, it says, shall be exalted and lifted up, future tense, okay? He will be, well, my servant shall prosper. Because it's proper to say about a God that he will prosper, he shall be exalted. Okay, we're not arguing if this is the Messiah or not. It could be talking about the Messiah. The Messiah is a servant of God. We agree with that. Okay, so my servant shall prosper. He shall be exalted and lifted up. You notice, he shall prosper is a future tense. So this can't be talking about God. God doesn't become prosperous. He's already prosperous from the beginning.
Right. So like I told you how so you can interpret this. For example, you can interpret this through different lenses. If you look at it through rabbinic tradition, that's how you're going to interpret it based on that. Or you can look at it through the eyes of Christian interpretation, and it makes sense. It makes sense that the belief that God taking on God becoming a man, God taking on flesh and becoming a servant, and then it speaks of him being highly exalted and glorified after that. So I think that we both have our presuppositions. We both have our biases on this, but there are things that I think that we can agree on. For example, okay, I'll let you go. Your mic.
Like you said, there are many interpretations, and you have your biases on mine. So we can't go by here and now worship a man just on this verse alone, or any other verse, which we may have disputes on. If there's a dispute on a verse, then obviously the verse is not clear. So it's better to follow what you followed before, until we can get a very, very, very clear reading. How do we know in 10 years somebody will bring the proof that it's not the Messiah, or it's not the God? So we don't know. So it's better to follow what we always followed before, and follow what the Jews worship, and that is someone who had no form, as we followed on the Mount Sinai.
Okay, so I think that there are other passages that they don't have any sort of ambiguity to them. I think that the faithful interpretation based on the Hebrew text itself, the Hebrew Bible itself, would lead to certain beliefs. For example, if for example, we discussed this before about God said he appeared in a form to Moses. Moses saw the form of the Lord. We discussed that before. Temunat Adonai. So that's an example of God being able to appear in a form. So that's agreeing with what we believe as Christians, that God can appear in a form. And no, we don't worship the form. We do not worship the form. Like I said to you before, we don't worship the physical flesh of Jesus, like his physical hands or his legs, his skin. We don't worship the physical form, but we worship the God who dwelled in the flesh, the God who dwelled in the flesh. For example, Moses didn't worship any form of the Lord, but he worshipped the God who filled the form that God appeared in. For example, like the burning bush. For example, Moses didn't start worshiping a bush, but he continued to worship the unseen God, the God who appeared in a form. So what do you have to say? What do you think about that, Mike Frey?
Okay, you keep on saying that no one worshipped your God in the form, okay? But actually they did worship, okay? The brownie boy claims that if it says bow down to him, it's bowing to a god, and people called him a god. Moses did not worship the burning bush. He didn't even bow down to it. Okay, he did not worship the burning bush, and no Jew worshipped the temple, even though a god dwelt in it. You'll find no place in the Jew Bible where it says the Jews worshipped or bow down to the temple. Okay, but Christians bow down, his disciples bow down to him and called him a god. Okay, which says in Deuteronomy, and in Deuteronomy it says you should worship. God declares that you saw no form on the day that I saw you on Mount Horeb, and he says that twice. So whether Moses saw a form or not, okay, we'll debate about that. Even if your claim is true, God tells the Jews not to worship any form. Okay, He says that in Deuteronomy 4. So Jews do not worship any form. Therefore, they can't make any statues. That's why you see no statues in front of synagogues like you see in churches. You go to almost every church, you see a statue of their God. This is clear idol worship according to the true Bible. It says, do not worship, do not make any form of stone or anything. Okay.
Okay, there's a few points that I want to respond to, but then I want to have a major focus on God appearing in the form. So first of all, you can bow down to kings. It doesn't mean that you're, like, for example, bowing down to David. For example, that doesn't mean you're worshiping David. So did Jesus' disciples worship him? Yes. Did they call him God? Yes. But they do not worship the flesh of Jesus. That's what I'm trying. That's what I'm saying to you. What you're saying is correct. That we do call Jesus God. We do say that Jesus is God, but we don't worship the physical form. So we mentioned about the statues and things like that in churches. Just because you bow down to a statue doesn't mean that you worship the statue. So, for example, like you have Jewish people praying towards Jerusalem, praying towards the temple. It doesn't mean that you worship the temple. Doesn't just because you bow down towards the temple, or you pray at the wall, the kotel, the Wailing Wall. So that doesn't mean that you. Okay, sorry about that. Yeah, so you can bow down to the prayer wall in Jerusalem, the kotel, the Western Wall, and that doesn't mean that you worship the wall, right? So it's the same thing. Just because you see people bowing towards statues at churches, it doesn't mean that they worship it. But I want to. This is what I feel is really important. What we should focus on now. Is it possible that God that God, the unseen God, the God that no one can see, can appear in forms? And for example, people can see the form, but just because you see the form, you don't actually see God himself. You see God who dwelled in something, but doesn't mean you see God. Like, for example, the temple. You use the temple as an example. We see the temple, and God dwelled in the temple. Or the burning bush. Moses heard the bush speaking, but he didn't. Like you said, he didn't actually see God, God in his fullness. So, do you believe that it's possible that God can appear in forms? God can appear in a form, but not worship the form. Your mic.
Yeah. It says actually in Deuteronomy 4. Let me get it. Just a minute. Here, this is Deuteronomy 4, verse 12. And the Lord spoke unto you out of the midst of the fire. Ye heard the voice of the words, but ye saw no form, only a voice. Okay? So here God's telling you that you didn't see a form. Now, why would God tell you if you didn't see a form, if God comes down in a form? And God will come down in a form. So why is he telling us that he has no form? Okay? And I want to ask you something also. When Moses asked God to let him to see him Why didn't he say, okay, I'm going to come as the Christian God, and you'll see me full body and everything? How you like that? Why didn't he tell him that? Why did he tell him go in a rock, and you'll see my back, and you'll see this? And you claim that Moses went on the mountain and saw God. So why did and again? So why did God tell him? If when Moses said, "Can I see who?" He says, You can only see my back." When you claim him and the 70 elders saw God already. So obviously your position doesn't make a lot of sense. Next.
Well, remember, it's not me saying that. It's that's what the Bible says. Exodus 24 verses 9 through 10. It says, when Moses, Aaron, Nadab, Abihu, and the 70 others went up, they saw the God of Israel. That's what it says. That's what the text says. That's not what I said. So what you're doing is you're setting this up as if it's contradictory. What I'm doing is I'm saying that it's in perfect harmony, that God is unseen. God is no one has seen the Father. No one has seen the Father, but when God chooses to reveal himself, he can, and he does that through his Son. So instead of turning this into a dichotomy where you have a contradiction, like either God can be seen, and if we find references where it says he has no form, he can't be seen, that's contradicting each other. No, what I'm saying is they're both true. Jesus, for example, Jesus said in John 6:46, he clarifies and he says, no one has seen the Father. No one has seen the Father except the only one who is from God. He's seen the Father. So when God chooses to reveal himself to his creation, to his people, he does so. For example, the verse that you alluded to, Moses and the 70 others, Aaron, Nadab and Abihu, they all saw the God of Israel. That's what the text itself says in Exodus 24. So here's the verse again in Numbers 12, which by the way, this doesn't contradict Deuteronomy 4:12. So these aren't contradictory when it says, with him I speak mouth to mouth, even manifestly, and not in dark speeches. In the similitude of the Lord doeth he behold. So he sees the similitude of the Lord, the form of the Lord. Wherefore then were ye not afraid to speak against my servant Moses. So Moses here, we see that Moses actually does see the form of the Lord. So I just wanted to establish that point with you, that God actually can appear in a form, and this isn't a contradiction. Mike free.
Actually, it doesn't say what form he saw. Okay, and second of all, the true God says that in that same Numbers, it says that to my prophets I speak. I speak to them, but they saw no form. I only speak to them in prophecy while they're sleeping. They see me in a prophecy. So how do we know that the 70 elders didn't see a prophecy of God? Just like Isaiah saw in a prophecy. We have God's word telling us that I speak to them he says in a vision. In a vision, I come to them. And he said about Moses, Moses saw me face to face and spoke to me like one speak to a friend. Yes. So he says, even this verse, he says only Moses can see him face to face. And he says no one else can. So how did all the Jews see him?
Yeah. So it's true that God does appear to people in visions, but there are other clear verses, like Radical Monergist posted one, for example, and he said about Moses, Moses saw me face to face and spoke to me as one friend speaks to another friend. So, sorry, as one speaks to a friend. So when you speak to your friend, he doesn't appear to you in a dream or in a vision. No, it actually, God appeared to Moses and they spoke. You know, if me and you were in a coffee shop and me and you were speaking face to face, just as a friend speaks to a friend, that's what's implied. So what you're saying is true, and what I'm saying is that there's no contradiction there. It's not one way or the other. These are different ways God appears. For example, God appeared to Abraham. And God appeared to Hagar as well. And there's a lot of instances in the Bible where God appears to people. God appeared to Abraham in visions, but God also appeared to Abraham in as a form as well. So again, there's no contradiction here, Pete. Well, that's what I'm trying to say. What you're trying to do is you're trying to set it up like there's a contradiction. But what I'm telling you to do is I'm telling you to accept all of what the Hebrew Bible has to say, not just the parts that agree with your traditions and etc. But actually, all of the Bible is true. Your mic.
Okay, here's the verse. It says, "Hear now my words. If there be a prophet among you, I, the Lord, do make myself known to him in a vision. I do speak with him in a dream." It doesn't say sometimes I speak to him in a dream. It says every time I speak, I make myself known to him in a vision. Okay? And nowhere does God appear as a man. You interpret the verse like that, but the verse doesn't say that God appeared as a man. You said, hey, God appeared as a man. That's not true. And I'll show you. Now, you say the Father, the Son, and this and that. But nowhere in the true Bible does it say the Father, the Son, or this and or what you claim, Father, Son, or a Spirit, or this or that, or whatever you claim. It says, "Hear, O Israel, God is one." And since you have a version that God is three, so you have to reinterpret the verse 1 to claim that it doesn't have to be really one; it could be 3. So we can also interpret verses to our satisfaction, and there is no contradiction. You have a contradiction. There is a contradiction. If he says that you saw no form, and then people saw a form, there is a contradiction, and you claim you have an answer. We also have an answer, so there is no contradiction to us either. Okay, there is a contradiction. Well,
Yeah, so why there's a contradiction is because you don't accept the plain meaning of the text. You don't actually agree that God appears in a form. So Numbers chapter 12 verse 6 isn't saying that God only appears in visions and dreams. It goes on to say that he also beheld the form of the Lord. And then the verse that I was talking about is in Genesis chapter 16. Then she called, talking about Hagar, Genesis chapter 16, starting at verse 13. Then she called the name of the Lord who spoke to her, "You are the God who sees." For she said, "Have I also seen him who sees me?" So again, we see another instance of where God is seen. And then, you have God even appearing to Jacob, wrestling with Jacob, which first it says it's a man, and then it calls then it goes on to say that no, this is actually God. Jacob actually calls a God, and there are other references where it says that it's a messenger or an angel. But what it is it's an instance of when God appeared in human form or in a physical form, and he appeared to Jacob, for example. Even even in the Garden of Eden, you have God walking in the garden to the point where it says that they heard God walking in the garden. They heard him walking in the garden. So how could you hear someone walking if they don't have a physical form? So yeah, but what I was trying to say about the contradiction was that your interpretation isn't going with the plain meaning of the text. What you say is that all these references where God allegedly appears, you just say, oh, those are all angels. Those are just all angels. Those aren't actually God appearing, even though it says it's God, even though it says God was seen. You say that it was actually an angel. So that's what I'm saying. We both have interpretations. That's true, but who's sticking to the plain meaning of the text, and who's reading it too much of the traditions into it? Radical moderate, your mic.
Okay, we're not going to respond to, we won't want to say. Okay, now you said that you said that Jacob wrestled with God. It said that Jacob wrestled with God. Did you say that? Nikki, did he say that? And he says, yeah. And then he says, you keep saying that it's a prophet, that it's an angel. Well, look over here. And what is the prophet Hosea said? He strove with an angel and prevailed. He wept and says occasions unto him. So it's Hosea. Our prophet tells us it's an angel. Okay. Well, now why would Hosea change the wording of the Bible? Why would he change it if Jacob said he wrestled with God? Why would Isaiah change it? Isaiah is a prophet. And then they tell us, you Jews don't listen to the prophets. It seems that you're not listening to the prophet when he says it's an angel. Actually, cool. I agree with you 100%. So obviously, Isaiah knew more than these Christians, and he claimed that you actually, the reason why I said it's an angel is because you can't see God, so therefore he claimed that it was an angel. And we see in the Bible, I can show you that angel has God's name. Next. Okay, it looks like everybody's busy, so we'll see you. We'll continue next time. Thank you very much for listening, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.